Making bread doesn't have to be hard or overwhelming, and I'm not only talking about sandwich bread. Today I want to share my secret to multitasking when it comes to bread of all kinds, from hamburger and hot dog buns to the beautiful bread bowl. Not only will this method save you time in the kitchen, but it will also save you money as we remove one more item from your weekly grocery list. For the past couple months, bread has been my mission. I'm trying to figure out how I can maximize the time that I spend in the kitchen and get the most out of it for the needs of my family. My goal this year, as I've shared before, is to not buy any store-bought bread products. So today I want to show you exactly what I have found to be one of the easiest ways to save myself some time and effort, plus get everything accomplished in one fell swoop. Now, while I am using freshly milled flour, this is not a necessity at all to use the same techniques that I'm going to show you today to make sure that you can make everything that your family needs at home. To get started on this day, I am milling up about 8 cups of flour in total. I'm using a combination of hard white wheat and kamut, but you can use just regular all-purpose if that's what you have at home. Now, this recipe is something that I have been perfecting and modifying over the past couple of weeks, but more so than showing you exactly what ingredients you need to put in the bowl, my goal is to show you what can be done with one simple recipe. I am also working with yeasted bread today, so we're going to use store-bought yeast instead of sourdough. I have done sourdough in the past and I really love it. I actually am going to get back into it here very soon, but somehow I can't wrap my brain around the process at this given moment to have it ready when I'm ready to bake. Because right now, when I have the time, I want to jump in the kitchen and get it done. And that doesn't always come along with a lot of planning in advance. I do have plans to go ahead and make myself a little more free to use sourdough moving forward. I'll share a little bit more about what I'm doing for that later. But first, I want to show you exactly what I'm doing with this dough. To my mixing bowl, I'm adding 6 total cups of liquid. This consists of part water and part milk. The more milk that I have at home that's close to going sour, the more I'll use. I do find that the more milk I put in, the softer it is. So if I have 4 cups of milk and 2 cups of water, I just kind of go in whatever direction. The recipe that I started with was a half and half mixture there, but feel free to make those changes. As you get more used to bread, you'll know exactly what you can do and what you can't do. But changing out milk for water, water for milk, that will always be something that you can accomplish. Into this mixture, I'm adding sugar, salt, and eggs before giving it a rest to let all of that flour get really hydrated. Now, if you're interested in where I've been learning a little bit more about bread, I want to introduce you to Craftsy, which happens to be the sponsor of today's video. If you aren't familiar with Craftsy, you need to be. Craftsy is your online resource for all things creative. They offer a wide variety of classes to choose from everything in the Bold Baking Academy, like all about bread and mastering doughs and pastries, to classes on how to upcycle thrifted fashion finds and more in their sewing, which you're sure to find something that we'll all enjoy. I personally love their cooking and baking classes, of course, but they also have classes on knife skills and crock pot recipes that were great for us as well, cake decorating, and more. But one of my favorite aspects of Craftsy is that the instructors are so clear and easy to follow, and they're talented experts in their field that even my older kids can plug into classes that they love, which takes our homeschool arts and crafts up a notch. If you are new to Craftsy but are interested in trying it out, make sure to click my link in the description below. The first 1,000 of you to click that link will receive a full year of the premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49. Thank you again to Craftsy for sponsoring today's video. Now that my flour has had some time to get hydrated, it's time to go ahead and add the yeast into my recipe. The ease of using a store-bought yeast, which I'm using instant today, so it kind of reacts right on time, is one of the reasons that I really do like this recipe. Depending on what I have going on at home, I can let this set for 15 minutes and jump straight back into it, or I can let it set up to a couple hours before I come back to add the yeast. Now, when I have a little one that still naps, this is a huge advantage to making things happen. Once the yeast is added to the bread dough, it's time to go ahead and crank it up a notch. Now, I am actually doing a quadruple batch. This is enough for 4 large loaf pans, size 5x9. But I am able to put it all in my Anchor mixer. That is one of the benefits of having a large mixer. And I do understand not everybody has a mixer this large. If you need to do batches to get this accomplished, definitely go ahead and do so. There is one word of caution that I will share. If you're using a KitchenAid mixer, the new ones have a time limit on how long you're supposed to need without taking a break so that it doesn't overheat, burn up your motor or anything of that sort. So make sure you're following the manufacturer's directions on how long your mixer can go at a time so you don't run into problems with it long term. Once you have needed to reach a window pane stage, then you're ready to go ahead and let your dough go through the first rise. Now, because I'm doing so much at one time, I can't leave it all in the bowl of my mixer to rise like I traditionally do. So I went ahead and I put some oil in the bottom of this mixing bowl. I'm going to go ahead and pull all of the dough out into the mixing bowl, then oil the bowl to the mixer itself, put part of the dough back in there, and then let it rise. The amount of time that this will take to rise is really going to vary depending on the temperature in your house, as well as humidity and all of the things that go into bread. So I can't really give you a firm time there. I can tell you that most traditionally, this takes me about an hour and a half to 2 hours to go ahead and get this to a stage where I'm ready to move on. But it really is just going to vary depending on the time of year and all of the conditions. If you do have a proofing box, you can more control a lot of those variables. My dehydrator as well as my air fryer both have proofing settings, but with the quantity of dough that I'm using at this time, it just really isn't something that's going to bring everything to the same temperature at the same time. So I just leave it set out. You do want to make sure to put some sort of lid on it to keep it covered so it doesn't dry out. I just put a plate on top of my mixing bowl, and then my mixer actually comes with a lid. Once your dough has almost doubled in size, that's the point when I go ahead and get the bread pans ready. Now, I am using a stoneware pan. I have used several different options. I've done everything from cast iron to the ceramic, and these are my favorite. Not only are they non-toxic, but everything actually releases out of them super well when I butter them. Over time, they will build up a coating that will prevent me from needing to do this. But for now, butter is what I'm using. And I want to share one tip. If you do have pans like this, make sure to butter all the way up to the edges, the curved edge that kind of comes out. The reason is that the dough itself can kind of bevel over the edges when it's actually baking. And I had a time or two where the only spot that stuck was right around that top edge. So make sure to go all the way up and around. Previously, I have tried oil. I haven't been quite as happy with the results. So just use butter, give it a good smear around, and you'll be ready to go. Now, once your dough has finished proofing, go ahead and bring it out. This is where I get really specific. I know many people out there do not like to weigh. But when I'm baking, I feel like weighing gives me the most consistent, even product and ensures that everything I'm putting in the oven is done at the same time. If I have one loaf that is, 15 or 20 grams bigger, I don't want it to slow down my cooking process or for me to assume that one isn't done and the other is. So for me, it's worth the extra time that it takes. Every single time I empty out my big mixing bowl, zero out my scale, put it all back in there, figure out what it is, and then divide by 4. I'm dividing by 4 because the recipe that I'm making is for batches of dough. We will make way more things with it than just 4. You'll see that here in a moment, but you need a good base to know how you need to divide it and get it set up. One quick note to point out, I did go ahead and oil my countertop just to make sure that the dough doesn't stick. I didn't want to add extra flour to this, so I'm using oil instead just to make sure that I don't work in too much flour into the process. If you like to use flour, definitely go ahead and do so. I've just found that this works super well. I've also found, and I mentioned last time, sometimes I don't really love working specifically on my countertop because it is not smooth. But the oil does help everything come up and not get stuck in those little cracks. So this works well. It's just not my favorite. I'll show you a little bit later when we're working on the bread bowls. But for now, I want to go ahead and knock the first 2 sandwich loaves off the list so we can get some of this dough out of the way. The first step is to get it flattened out. You want to go about as wide as your bread pan. If you make a mistake in this, which I did, and I'll show you that a little bit later, but if you make a mistake in this, your loaf won't quite be as smooth as you want it to be on top in the pan. But once you get it all rolled out, I just fold in the top 2 corners and start to roll. Pulling towards you, creating tension as you go. This will help make sure that your bread doesn't actually cave in. Now, once you get to the end, continue to pull and get that tension. Tuck your ends under so the ends look nice and smooth, and then go ahead and just put it in your loaf pan. I went ahead and repeated those same exact steps with a second loaf of bread that is already over on the table, but what I have on the countertop now is hamburger buns. This same exact recipe will work for anything that you need made out of bread, as long as you're wanting the same light and fluffy texture that comes from a sandwich. So I'm gonna make a set of hamburger buns here first. These are really, really simple, especially like I said, since we're already making that same recipe. So I am gonna go ahead and cut into 16 instead of 8. If you want a big, huge bun, you can do 8 pieces, but we like slider size because we have a lot of tiny mouths around the house. We also have a few people that are more into meat these days than bread, but because of the health benefits that come along with the freshly milled wheat, they like to go ahead and eat just a little bit at a time. So having the slider size bun is definitely an advantage for my house. Also, because I can take this one loaf of bread, as it would be, and turn it into 16 buns, that means I can get several meals worth of buns out of this one loaf. I made these just a couple of weeks ago, and my kids were absolutely in love with them. They said it was the first time ever that they have not had any desire for store buns, so I'm gonna go ahead and say this one was a hit. The added bonus is that they freeze beautifully. So once I get these buns complete, we will go ahead and bag them up, and I'm gonna put them in the freezer to pull out at our convenience when we are ready to go. So this could be anything from hamburgers to sloppy joes, which I canned up a few months ago to make life easier. Having the buns ready to go is just a huge win. Highly recommend. Definitely, if you're already making sandwich bread, go ahead and make the buns as well. The process on those is actually super simple, as you just saw. You want to go ahead and make some little balls, create surface tension on them just like you do the dough. Once you have the balls complete, go ahead, put them on a sheet pan, and then you want to gently flatten them so you get the shape that you're looking for. Go ahead and cover them just like the bread, and they will rise a lot faster than your full loaf of bread because they are so much smaller. So now I'm going to go ahead and make the next thing out of this same loaf, which are going to be hot dog buns. We don't eat hot dogs very often, but I don't want to go to the store to pick up buns when we do. So I'm just doing the same exact thing using the same exact recipe. You can see this actually comes together really, really fast. I went ahead and weighed all of these out to get the exact same size, and then I'm just creating some mini loaves. You can fold this down about 2 or 3 times if you want instead of rolling. Now, once you get the approximate shape, you want to go ahead and pinch all of the ends together as well as pinching the seam. When you pinch the seam, it'll give you a really smooth underbelly, and then you can just pinch, roll, and kind of make a tiny little bread loaf here. As I was doing this, I was also in my brain thinking, whoa, this is amazing. These would be great breadsticks. So I have one little girl that absolutely loves cheese sticks. If I can just pull these out, paint them with some garlic butter, and top them with some mozzarella and put them in the oven, this would also be a fantastic use of the same recipe. The cool thing about making bread is that while it does take several hours to complete the entire process, it's definitely not all hands-on time. So once I got everything mixed up, I went and did math with my older kiddos. And once I got these set aside and let them rise, I took my baby upstairs to lay down and take a nap. So she's asleep right now. They are ready to go. I've got the oven going, and now all I need to do is go ahead and put an egg wash on top. This is optional. I know as prices for eggs go up, some people are going to say, like, why would I waste an egg on this? You definitely don't have to do it. All this does is make the top of your bread products a little more shiny and glistening, not so dry on top. But there are many times that I would go to the store and get either hamburger buns or hot dog buns, and I know for sure they didn't have an egg wash on them just based on how they looked. So totally dependent on you. Do this if you want to. Don't do this if you want to. Totally optional. Now, as you can see, my buns did kind of grow together, and as they bake, they will actually stick together a little bit more. That is totally fine. When you go to the store, they're always stuck together. You get 4 and then another 4. So this is an option. If you want them to look nice and perfect and not have that tiny little section where they were hooked to something else, just use a second pan, or even just make them bigger to begin with, and then you won't have so many on the tray. Once they are done, into the oven, 350 until they are done. It takes about 15 or 20 minutes. I do have one caution here. If you're looking at them and looking for a golden brown color, you might over tempt them just slightly. So make sure to pull these out when 15, 20 minutes, check their temperature. Once they reach 190 degrees inside, they are done. And that will prevent you from getting them to dry out or be a little too hard on top. It's just a really tiny step that will make a big difference in your overall outcome. I know there are several old school bread makers out there who are going to come in the comments and tell me that they never temp anything. Listen, I totally get it. But for those that are new to the idea of baking bread, we don't know what that's supposed to look like. So when we get that temperature and we can know that 190, they're not going to be gummy inside and they are going to be done, that is a huge asset just for peace of mind, knowing that you didn't put all this work in to come away with something that isn't properly done. Now, once they're complete, go ahead and pull them off and put them on a cooling rack. This ensures that they don't continue baking, especially if you're using a stone pan like mine. They can really retain heat, so this is a huge advantage to go ahead and get them off onto a cooling rack to make sure everything comes down to temperature. Now, at this point is when all of my crew starts to smell that the house is amazing and full of fresh bread. So they often start to come in and ask me if they can have some, but I usually refrain and make them wait until it's done. Now, I did mention earlier that the bread takes longer to proof. Because the rolls came out in about 15 or 20 minutes, then the bread was ready to go in. You can egg wash this or not. Most traditionally, I don't, but I did on this specific occasion because I already had that egg mixed up. I honestly wish I wouldn't have. So again, totally personal preference. Do what's going to work best for you. While these are in the oven baking, I want to take just a minute to chat with you about some things that are going on around YouTube. In all of my creator groups, we've been talking a lot lately about how YouTube has stopped notifying all of our subscribers about the content that we're posting. Instead, they've changed how they're pushing out content and they're sending things to who they think might like them instead of who has said they want our content by hitting the subscribe button. So this makes it a little harder for you to find our content. It also makes it harder for us to keep up with the same numbers that we're used to getting. There are a couple ways that you can help us out. One, like any video that I put up that you enjoy. This helps the algorithm know that people are actually enjoying the content. Also, if you can comment, that is super helpful. But lastly, if you can make sure to hit the bell when you subscribe, or even now, just hit the little bell icon down below, then they will go ahead and notify you when a new video comes out. It's super frustrating for many of my subscribers that tell me they can't see all my stuff all the time, and extra frustrating for all of the creators out there who spend hours putting all of these videos together to share with you here on YouTube. I greatly appreciate each and every one of you who take the time to enjoy my videos weekly, and I'd love for you to be able to continue enjoying them as time goes on. Now it is the next day, and the only reason that I'm doing this in 2 days is because the previous day when I got done baking the bread, I went ahead and made cheeseburger soup, which is one of my family's all-time favorites, but we really kind of hold off and keep it for those nasty, snowy, cold days. Here in Missouri right now, we were predicted to have 12 inches or 12 to 16 actually where I'm at today. It's currently still snowing as I sit here talking with you. We have about 8 inches on the ground right now, and it just continues to come down. So cheeseburger soup was on the menu for sure, and I made sure to have enough leftovers for the next day. But while we were eating it, I was thinking to myself, the only thing that would make this better is if it was in a bread bowl. And then I'm like, why? Why, when I had 4 different bulks of bread out there, didn't I turn one into bread bowls? So I woke up this morning and I went ahead and mixed up some more dough. Here we are making bread bowls. I skipped all of the basic, getting started steps in the beginning because I just showed you all of that the day before. But this is super easy. This recipe would make 6 large bread bowls, or you can go down to 8 smaller bread bowls. Because I have so many little kiddos and I know how things are going to go, their eyes are going to be bigger than their prize, and everybody's going to want the bread bowl, right? But they're not going to be able to finish it. So I went with 8 bread bowls. As you can see, I am weighing them out to make sure that they are precise. That's probably something that I'll never get away from. And then I'm going to go ahead and get them shaped. Now, to get the bread bowl shaped, you just press them out. The reason you want to do that is because you want to expel any air that's built up in the dough while it did its first rise. And that way you're not going to have those big, huge bubbles that you might get. Now, after you get them shaped, go ahead and just fold all of the corners in and pull them and pinch them into a circle. You want to create some surface tension, which is exactly what I'm going to do here in my hands. And then I'm going to put it down on the stainless steel cutting board. This is what I forgot to pull out and use yesterday. I love this thing. It helps me create the tension that I'm looking for in my bread, and it also keeps my counter clean, and I don't have to worry about the bread getting stuck in those tiny little cracks. I also use this to cut up chicken because I hate plastic cutting boards, and I don't know, I'm weird about wood when I'm using something of that sort. So using the stainless steel cutting board is a really big help to creating the tension that I'm looking for and keeping my countertop clean at the same time. So once you get them all twisted around and all tight and get that tension, then you want to go ahead and move them over to a baking stone. Now here I'm using the same big stones that I use for everything it seems around here. Just folding up the dough 4 corners in, pinching really tight and creating that circle before going ahead and creating the tension. Then these are going to go set to the side and they're going to rise. It took probably 35 minutes for these to rise because I did use a rapid rise yeast with them. I know traditionally people think of bread bowls as needing to be sourdough, and actually most artisan style breads people will assume are going to be sourdough, but that doesn't have to be the case. If you haven't got the knack for a sourdough starter or you're not interested in the upkeep and maintenance, you can do all of these things just by using yeast that you can purchase in the store. So don't let that hold you back. If you're interested in bread, definitely take the step. But as far as sourdough goes, I told you previously, I can't get my brain around what to do, and I want it to be ready to bake when I am ready. So I've been working on this for quite some time in my mind, thinking of how I'm going to do it. And I saved up a little bit of my Christmas money that I hadn't really placed on what I was going to do with it. And I purchased a sourdough home. Now, this sounds extra, and it really is. You can totally do sourdough without any extra help. But for me, I am going to use the sourdough home, mix up my sourdough starter, select the temperature that I want it to remain at the entire time. And then whether it's 3, 4, or even 5 days down the road, I can pull my starter out and it is ready to go. So this is for those of us who don't know when we're going to be able to bake, whether that's because you're busy mom running around after kids like me, or perhaps you have, a chronic illness and you don't know what days you're going to feel great. This thing, I think, is going to solve all my problems and get me back on target with my sourdough plans. I will definitely keep you updated on it because I cannot swear to it at all. It actually just got delivered today. I was so surprised, assuming that this weather was going to push it off and delay it. But it did come in today before the bulk of the snow. So I'm super happy to get this going, and we're going to see exactly how it turns out. The one thing you have to do different when you're using this sourdough home is you have to feed it a little different. So it's 1 part of your starter to 4 parts water and 4 parts flour. This will allow the proper amount of nutrition in there for the yeast so it doesn't go bad. Now, if I decide day 2 that I want to bake, I can go ahead and crank the temperature up to make it rise longer. But if I want to slow it down, I can actually turn it down too. They say the refrigerator is actually a little too cold for sourdough and it puts a starter in total dormancy. So this will prevent that, which is how I can pull it out and bake whenever I'm ready. Like I said, to be determined. I'll keep you updated. For now, I'm going to go ahead and score my sourdough bread bowls. Now, in the directions, it said you could go ahead and do this right off the bat before they rose, but I totally missed that and did it later, and it turned out just fine. So do what works for you. If you don't have any way to score or you don't have a lane, I don't have one either. I just use a razor blade. I went to the hardware store, picked up some razor blades, and they work really, really great as long as they're sharp. Now, this recipe called for a little different egg wash than the others. It's using a little bit of milk instead of water. Milk in anything is going to help soften, especially if you're using a raw milk like mine, because it still has all that fat content and cream that'll rise right to the top. So these did turn out a little bit softer than the 2 or 3 different breads that I made yesterday. So I really like this method. It'll just depend on, if we have the extra milk around or if I decide to egg wash that day. But it is a really good thing to kind of have in hand so that you have those options and can do whatever's best for you at the time. Once the egg wash goes on, then you're ready to bake. These took about 20 minutes or so at 400. They bake a little bit hotter and they turned out really, really beautifully. One of my kiddos was talking about how small they were, but it turns out not one of them was able to finish it. So they were the perfect size for us. Again, if you want a bigger bread bowl, you can definitely do so, but these held a full cup of soup just the way it was. And if you want a bigger portion, you can definitely come back for seconds. They held up well enough that I had seconds in one. And the added bonus here for us is that we started just with 4. A couple of the kiddos didn't want one. I think they thought they were a little overwhelming, but the other ones were so excited to try it out. Now, before you put the soup in, go ahead and move them off onto a cooling rack. You do want to let these cool a little bit. They are coming out exceptionally hot. They're right around 190 to 200 when they're done. So even though they're not quite as hot as the oven, they're still way too hot to touch. After I got them set aside, then I go ahead and just cut a big circle around the center. I have seen tools in the actual like bakeries that make these where they just put them down in there and they cut the circle and rip it out. You don't have to have that. Just use a serrated knife. This is actually my tomato knife. I'm not using my great big bread knife because it is so huge, but the little tomato knife works really well. I just go ahead and scoop out a little bit more than even comes out with the first cut. I had thought a spoon would do it, and then I thought, I'm going to rip it up. So went ahead and went back to my knife and pulled out a little bit more. I can tell you I had more than one set of little hands interested in grabbing everything that came out from inside. I hope today you picked up some tips, not necessarily on exactly precisely how to bake bread, but more of using the recipe that you might already have or to kind of get an idea of where you might be able to go and how you can make homemade bread products at home in a way that's not overwhelming or something that you have to plan on the go in that minute every single time. Everything that I made today is able to go in the freezer and come out when needed, whether that's our sandwich loaf of bread or the bread bowls that you're seeing here today. The good news is when we got done with our lunch, we actually had 4 of these bread bowls left, which means I can put these away for another nasty, nasty day outside when we need some warm soup to fill us up. Now, before we go, I want to take just a minute to remind you again, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell if you want to know what's going on around here. If you don't, make sure to check my page every Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. That is when the new uploads go live and you'll be up to date on everything going on around the house as we move into gardening season and the snow melts. I cannot wait to show you what I have planned. Also, I just want to remind you to be one of the first 1,000 people to click that link down in the description and get your premium membership to Craftsy for just $1.49. And while you're down in the description, don't forget to check out the links that I've shared for the recipes as well as any of the equipment that you've seen me using today. Thanks again, friends, for stopping by, and I'll see you back soon.